Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Or shall I say, welcome back, deep thinkers. Before I start today's episode, I wanted to just answer a question publicly because I get it quite a bit. And it is just a real innocent, fair question, which is, am I reading from a script or notes or whatever? And you'll hear me answer this. If you're an OG listener, you guys know the answer to this. I'm actually staring at my computer sound wave off a program called WavePad, which is pretty good. And so it just lets me see if the audio's right. Plus it has the clock in it so I can kind of see how far I've gone. I've probably used notes about 6 or 7 times out of 650 episodes. So a lot of you know there's episodes where I exude my riffing, which means the episode's not as intense. And other times I riff and it really works out. So when I do note reading, it's kind of like Anunnaki stuff or the CERN Hadron Collider. I think a little bit of chronology with things like Bermuda Triangle. Things where, there's a lot of, it's just bullet points. I'm not writing a script. I've never been able to read a teleprompter, but I've never really even tried, but it's just not my style. My thing is, I hated watching people do presentations at podiums, and they still do it. These fucking politicians that get up there and they kind of and it's so disingenuous, and it's been prepared for them by attorneys or their controllers or whatever. No, this thing is all live. For those few of you that have met me live, either through the Patreon face-to-face thing or live, you would vouch that, no, that brother could talk forever. I had to leave, Anyway, today's episode stems out of experience I just had, like a couple hours ago. I went to my lounge to do my standard 3D. I did some bunch of 3D at the house, and I wanted to just get a break. Doing it at a different location seems to be, refreshing. I don't know what it was. So I'm sitting there, I'm getting all ready to go. I'm just doing a few things. And this gentleman who's come to the lounge off and on for like 3 years, at least, walks in the front door. And he sits down. And there's a bunch of reasons why I started talking to him. But towards the second half of the conversation, he brings up the issue of maybe in the last 30 minutes, he said, let me ask you a question, man. Do you believe in ghosts, man? Do you have any experience with ghosts? Now, nothing we had talked about before had anything to do with that. Well, you can imagine, if you're an OG listener, what I was about to say. But it all boiled down. This guy's super intelligent. It all boils down to this thing I keep repeating in my personal life a lot. Which is, everyone's looking for some sort of support for things that seem a little fringy, right? And so they get concerned that, I can't really tell anybody I believe it. I saw this thing. I had this experience. It doesn't have to be ghost like in whatever you saw in Poltergeist or whatever like that. You can have apparition ghost things. But the thing I keep telling people is I said, look, scientists tell you that things exist because they've developed an instrument to prove to you that it exists outside of, say, blatant reality around you, right? So I've got a computer in front of me, video camera up here, there's a wire going here. So if they wanted to check and see if something was real about this equipment, they might use some sort of wire to sense electromagnetic fields, wireless communication, etc., right? And they would tell us that what they discovered in their machines is actually in existence, and everything else, well, we'll see. A long, long time ago, I told you guys, look, if machine sensing is the number one way by which the scientific community acknowledges that something exists, then what is the best machine in the entire universe that we know of as human beings that we should lean on to discern reality? And the answer is you. Your body, your mind, your soul, the whole connection pool of the whole thing. But there's a catch. If I were to say that to a scientific community, There's definitely people in the audience. Let's say I could fill a stadium of maybe 100 seats at a lecture hall. All official scientists, in flying quotes. I guarantee you there's going to be at least a dozen out of 100 who've had these experiences. Out of that dozen, I don't know what the percentage would be, but I'd probably guess about 80 to 90% of those 12 would be too scared to say something, to be ridiculed by their peers, because they're so conditioned to operate by the approval of each other. We have scientific process, they'll say. You haven't written a peer-reviewed paper. Think about that. How does a peer-review paper work? You claim something scientific using scientific method. It could be in medicine. It could be in small particle physics, macro cosmology physics, or whatever. And you have to basically talk about and list your protocol of recreating the experiment. If you're basing your experiment off previous, already vetted experiments that are already peer-reviewed, you must mention those so that they can just immediately leap off of that previous platform and add your little thing to it to see if what you're claiming in your new paper is plausible, yet, or maybe even provable, right? The problem with me acknowledging, or you acknowledging, or us acknowledging anything spiritual is that the more you close your mind, in my opinion, the less you have these experiences. How could you believe in something that you can't conceive of? And therefore, if that is the gate key to the experience, well then you're absolutely closed-minded to that ever occurring to you ever. The epiphany that you might be waiting for is inconceivable. Now, it might be that you pull a thread out of a sweater and you couldn't conceive of how messy that experience was going to be or other repercussions of doing so. You know, when you pull that string out of your underwear and it starts to fold up in that little tiny ball, you're like, oh man, I thought this was going to come out. I realized it's still hanging on inside. Those kind of things. So the experience he's having at this home where he is renting a room is that when he's in bed at night, playing on either his tablet or his phone, a little game or something, he hears someone get up in the middle of the night and walk in the hallway out front of his door. He makes it sound like it's on a second floor, but that's kind of rare where I live. Could be. And then he says it walks by his door and then opens the sliding glass door. But when he describes the occupants of his house, it has an elderly owner, a gentleman who's in his 90s who owns the house, and his caregiver, who's a younger woman, and then one other roomie. Obviously, he does the immediate math in his head, and he says, well, it's probably, based on sort of the walk pattern, the caregiver who lives in a room down the hall. But after checking with these individuals, they never got up. But there's a little thing that he hasn't done yet. Last night, apparently, he got up out of his bed. He goes, look, I'm not dreaming, man. He goes, I'm not having some epiphany. I'm not having some vision or something while I'm in Twilight Zone or something. He goes, I got up out of the bed and I put my ear to the door-ish. And he goes, I heard these steps walk by. And he goes, the thing that was interesting was he looked down at the light that comes along the bottom of his door. And he says, every time someone human walks by in flesh and bone, he says they block the light with their feet. You can just see it. No big deal, right? He said, this light doesn't change. But he goes, I can hear it. And he goes, at one point, I guess in a previous experience, he waited for the whole thing to conclude, and then he goes out and finds out that there's no one outside, everyone's in their rooms, the door is shut. And so he's like, I think there's a ghost in the house. And he goes, maybe it's the guy's wife. Now, where I live, you have to understand that most of the homes, probably an overwhelming percentage, and I'm going to say easily 90% of the homes in this area were built in the 60s as the orange orchards were sold off. This is Orange County. It was growing oranges in absolute droves. In fact, the house next to me is one of the first homes built right where I am, and it was purchased, I believe, in 63 to 65, somewhere in there. And they said that across the street, which is just, 50 feet or whatever, which is a big thoroughfare in here. It was just all fields and tractors and oranges, okay? So we get to talking. Now, I won't repeat a lot of stuff that I've said in previous episodes about my personal experiences, except to reference them as sort of event-based stories, right? But without going through all the specifics again. But once you experience it, it changes you forever in a way that you feel much more comfortable with reality. Now, my two experiences I had that were truly seeing individuals were, in my opinion, comfortably in my mind's eye and nothing out in the world that could be seen by anybody else, but extremely informative. They were very prophetic, I guess you would say, right? They predicted events, and just, in a real super duper nutshell for the absolute new listeners, a grandmother told me she had passed at 12 noon while I was still in my bed, and she was just hovering over me and said that she had passed and she was in a good place. Now, I didn't know she was dying. And then 2:30, really about 2:20 that afternoon, my mother calls me and tells me her mom passed away. And I said on the phone, I know, she told me this morning, which going into the ear of a very left brain person with absolutely just nothing but necrosed right brain cells, she couldn't process the words that I said. It was as if I didn't speak. And mentioning it to her 15 years later was no different. I mean, no different. There's just no experience except a smirky, snarky, typical response of an idiot. That kind of thing, right? So you're like, okay, you're just not a person to have a conversation with. I get it. And then the other infamous one from the show is that I was at Disneyland and Walt Disney walks up to me and says, I can find an Imagineer, a very famous Imagineer I'd met about 3 or 4 weeks earlier. And he put a pin in the park where I needed to walk to find him. And with my girlfriend next to me, we walked straight up to this pin, and there he is standing there with his friend. And I called him 10 years later, and I told him the story, and he wasn't shocked. He said, Walt's all over that park. He lives there. I mean, the odds, a bunch of details in there, the odds are just incredibly against this being a happenstance thing, because he's in the part of the park I don't go to. Okay, there's the end of my recollection of my two biggest experiences. And I had another kind of spiritual experience, but it's not important right now. So going back to the opening statement, what if I told you that you've got way more than 5 senses? A lot of you have tremendous backgrounds in discovering those other senses. How many we have, I couldn't tell you. But I think that they are in categories, and I think that they could be likened to sort of the belts in fighting styles, right? So you have black belt in karate, right? And you can have, I don't even know how many belts there are, but I've heard of guys with 26 degrees black belt. I don't even know. That kind of sounds silly. Maybe if you knock the top off of a plastic bottle with your foot, you get 28th or something. I don't know. But I do think that we have this ascension capability. And I suspect, because of a lot of spiritual stories from other cultures around the world, Aborigines, lots of Africans, lots of South American folks who never lost their roots, the roots of their culture. They've had Christianity jammed down their throat in a lot of cases, but what's interesting about it is you still have the Day of the Dead sneak through. The Aborigines do it. Samoans and Tongans do it. There's all of these cultures. The Japanese have, shrines to their loved ones who have passed on. Regardless of what the Pope told them, they maintain this connection, and they maintain it because not only does it have a spiritual significance to them on an intellectual level, there's a feedback loop there. There's an interaction. They're getting something out of it way beyond just soothing perhaps a painful moment in their life. The Egyptians, they used to leave food out for folks that had passed on, from pharaohs to individuals. And when the food died and curled up and rotted and dehydrated, In their mind, that was the spirit consuming the life energy out of that meal. Very beautiful, very believable. Could you imagine? I'm offering you this fruit, my relative, my friend, and now maybe, just I'm making this up, but imagine there was a little rule. Well, if the fruit's out there, it's going to die on the ground, go ahead and grab it. Just run your soul through that fruit. Not that it's important to be in the matter realm once you cross over. I'm sure that what we have to offer is pales in comparison to the dimensionality and features of their software on the other side, right? But perhaps it is a way of just simply interacting. Well, I don't have to do this, but everything that has life has this soul energy in it, whether it be organized into an intellectual consciousness or just simply be, who knows, that other energy. They partake, and they are completing the exchange between their relatives that are trapped in the human body and their light-based life forms, right? The movie Poltergeist comes to mind big time when I think about this sort of thing. The beautiful contrast in that script of Poltergeist, released in 1982 by Steven Spielberg and friends, was that you have a family that is pretty secular. They're dope smokers, which was a big deal in 82. There's a lot of people that were doing it, but it was super illegal back in the day. The kids weren't old enough to really be into it. The older daughter was pretty much on the precipice of being a TikTok star. And so they were the non-believers. They were sort of the agnostic individuals. You didn't see crucifixes on the wall. They didn't talk about going to church or anything. So they were sort of absent. And then all of a sudden, their daughter disappears. It's all copied from my Twilight Zone, by the way. Almost verbatim. But in comes the team. The team that starts to break it down, because once the daughter left the realm, the parents didn't sleep. The possession of the house, aka the poltergeist of the house, was playing with lights, moving chairs, moving all kinds of stuff. Now, before the little girl disappeared, there was definitely the playful stage of the movie where the kids are getting dragged across the floor of the kitchen, which was absolutely hilarious. But this team comes in, and I think it's just 3 people, a woman and 2 men, and they were bragging about all of the things that they had experienced. And of course, this is a fictional film, but I want you to think about it as sort of the metaphor of our journey when considering these sorts of topics. The nerdy guy, this white nerdy guy, he was pretty quiet in the experience. He's more of a tech guy. This very spiritual white woman, she was just, very sort of soothing and warming. And then you had this Billy D. Williams kind of black guy in there, and he was the one that seemed to have the most experience actually filming things and getting things done. And he was very intelligent. He's a scientist, you could tell. And so there's a point in the movie where the woman says, "Could you take us to the epicenter where all this, where your daughter disappeared?" And the father's, he's got his bloodshot eyes, and he's like, "Yeah, sure, I'll take you upstairs. You sure you want to see this, right?" And just before he opens the door where the daughter disappeared, the scientist, the Billy D. Williams kind of guy, he was talking about how he filmed a Hot Wheel that had traveled across the floor, something like 22 feet, but it took like 12 hours to do it. But he filmed it with time-lapse photography, and he was blown away by what he had seen, And the father just kind of looks at him and goes, "Is that it?" It was like he looked at him like, "All right, that's great, man. It's really great what you did there." He opens the door, and his fucking bedroom is just full of shit flying around in a big cyclone, like a toy record player started flying in the air, and this compass comes down and hits it like a needle and starts playing it, and a book flies up and flaps in this woman's face. And it was just like, okay, wow. Now you've seen it, right? You see what was in that room. If that was level 1, this is level like 1,000, right? But think about it. When you break down the meeting of these two, you have this mother and this father who are very secular And they're trying to tell this woman, this first woman that shows up, she's a middle-aged woman, trying to tell her what happened, and they feel embarrassed because I'm talking about ghosts, you know? And then, of course, they bring in the little old lady who is, she's psychic, man. She's got the real deal. And she's the one that's going to figure this thing out and figure out how to actually resolve the problem. And then I'll let you finish the film yourself, right? Because you either are usually, because we let the world just happen. We don't intentionally think deep in this world. Hell, we don't even think at all in this world anymore, right? A lot of you would love to have these experiences. And I've been studying this my whole life, studying my own reaching out to spirits that I know that if there weren't rules or regulations against them participating in my life, they'd be right here. I mean, most of you can rationalize the fact that there is probably someone out there in your past who has passed on who was more modern to think about these kind of things. They were open-minded. Perhaps they told you ghost stories, and now they're on the other side. And you're thinking, oh, come on, Grandpa. Come on, you used to tell us all these stories about your experiences with ghosts. I'm here. I'm totally ready for you to enter this realm with me and say hello. Just do something silly. And yet it doesn't happen. And then, out of thin air, something that you couldn't imagine happens. And you're like, whoa. How is it? And I'll just tell you from my own perspective, just experimenting from childhood up, and probably childhood in this particular case would be at least by my mid-teens, I was experimenting at night. Me in my bed, the room's dark, and I would, and of course there's religious people who get really, really worried about this kind of thing, but I was talking to very specific individuals, not just random spirits in the world. But just asking someone to make something happen, to make light happen. Imagine like talking to Tesla. I didn't even know that dude existed until I was in my 30s. How pathetic, right? I studied the hell out of science and I still wasn't taught about this guy. I mean, it's just the conspiracy of keeping him down is just unbelievable. But this man was a master of electricity, which means, and he was an ethereal scientist. So the very substance that this entire universe is made out of, the invisible water that makes this whole place, he was a master at it. He understood it completely. And so you think, well, gosh, that guy would know of all things. Plus, he doesn't have any, bias towards you because he doesn't know you. You don't know him. You're long gone. I had a very select group of friends. And so if you were to say, okay, Tesla, come on. My room is pitch black. You know how to excite, aka even slow down, I shouldn't say excite, but to slow down the velocity of ether such that it turns into some form of light plasma cloud in my bedroom. It doesn't need to look like you, it doesn't need to look like anything, just a tiny flicker of light. I may not even be able to see the source of it. Just make the light of my room, the blackness of my room flicker with a bit of your magic light that you did in your laboratories for the gentleman known as Mark Twain. His Paris World Fair. He was a master at this stuff. And yet nothing happens. At least for me, at least, right? I don't know of anyone that can reliably call upon a ghost. They may routinely see them, but they can't control it. So it's never on our dime, as it were say. They don't respond to being pushed around by our requests. It might be a way to interpret it. So even if you've had an experience, you let me know if you're able just to say, boom, ghost. Because if you could, you would. And everyone's got a 4K camera in their telephone and they'll record it. This friend of mine, he is going to attempt to, he said if he hears it again, he's going to get up, get the thing recording on his phone, and open that door when the sound's going by to see if he can see something. I've got other friends that are very scientific friends, and they've told me stories about being in their home with one other person on the second floor, and they're done hanging out upstairs. They want to go downstairs, and they walk by a sibling's door, and they're 19, I think, is the age of both of them, and they hear this rumbling behind the door. And so they're kind of like, whoa, what's going on there? Someone wrestling on the other side. And they said the rumbling was like two big men tossing themselves around a room. Not necessarily break anything, but the floor pounding was big. And then she said that once she got herself close to the door, there was a roar and she said it was like a demon was on the other side of the door. She said that's the only way I can describe it. And what was interesting was she did this thing where she said, I can't really do it. And then she did it on the phone. And even her impersonation of this thing was blood-curdlingly realistic. And she said, my friend and I looked at each other like, oh my God, you can hear this, right? And they left the house and waited for the grown-ups to come home. And of course, there's nothing in that room. This is a very credible friend of mine, extremely credible. Not a person with, I think, even 2 stories of this, just one story, and that was it. And I guarantee you, when she experienced that and her friend experienced that, their life has changed forever. But the one change I want to suggest to you that happens that we don't really talk about, although we infer it and we understand it subconsciously when people tell us these stories and we feel like they're being genuine, they're telling us the real experience that they had, a door is opened forever. How many of you have been to somebody's house and for whatever reason they took a door off the door jamb? It's just that thing they did. And for whatever reason, some people do it to their master bathrooms just because they don't want to open it. They figure if you're in my room, then you're supposed to be here. It's usually me. I close the door to my room, and then wherever I go, including the bathroom, is my business, right? And so it's sort of like that. There used to be a door there, except that I would say for some of us, maybe not myself, I got to recuse myself from this, but for some of you, you didn't think you ever thought about it, as a thing that would happen to you. Of course, you can't really exist in this world and watch any television or a movie, especially in the modern day of the 21st century, without having this concept suggested to you. So maybe 60, 70 years ago, you'd still have a kid that never thought about a ghost, and then if they see one, it would be phenomenal. But to actually experience anything on that level takes that specific door, that specific experience, and opens it up. It doesn't mean it will lead to other things. For instance, the 2 things that I had were definitely in my mind's eye with voices, real voices, man. It's crazy. And it's one of these things where I hid it forever. In some cases, the Walt experience, I hid. And I was like, finally I just said, okay. I took my girlfriend aside and I said, look, you don't know this, but this is what happened. Did you think that was pretty weird? We walked straight to him and it wasn't in the park that we go to and we were hangry. We were supposed to go to eat food and ride 2 rides and leave because we had season passes. And she was like, yeah, that is really weird. I was wondering why we did that and how you just walked right up to him. Boom. And the fun thing was, much later, we were at a dinner outside during the day and we met this couple. And I brought the story up because somehow it got there, and for the first time, she backed me up on the story, adding more details to it. I was like, wow, that's cool. She has been percolating that experience as well. She didn't see anything, but she saw the results of it, right? So the second part of this, I really want to talk about how would you exercise your mind to potentially open yourself up to this experience in the future. Now, I do believe, and it's like I really, really, really struggle. You'll hear me struggle in episodes where I'm very cautious about suggesting that there is truly the devil as the Bible might suggest. But I do believe in darkness, dark energy that is trying to undo all things that would be either creation or, creation in both the matter realm, which is our world continuing to exist, but also creation in the realm of, I guess, love, passion, empathy, sympathy, all the qualities that you might attribute to a creator that would imbue a reality with a purpose. Love is purpose, and purpose is love. So if you kill love, you kill purpose. And once you kill purpose, you kill a soul. And the sick question is, I think that it's fairly clear that not only do the nefarious human beings of this world who seem to overtly worship stories about these deities actually existing, and perhaps they do. I mean, they got all the money in the world, and they probably have all the knowledge of the world that man has ever discerned out of CIA research, KGB research, spiritual research, monks, Jesuits, whatever, rabbis, and others. And yet they're conducting rituals. So that's where I sort of go, well, okay. Yeah, I know there's bored rich people, and they do weird stuff, and they're not as intelligent in a lot of cases as we prop them up to be. But because they got money, they can control people. I mean, you can have some devious idiots out there that can really make a lot of money, but when you really sit them down and talk about things, they're just clever in an evil way. So there's probably that too. So the reason why I mentioned that little side thing is that I do believe that one needs to be careful about just opening oneself up to this other realm, because one could find themselves in trouble. It could be that all you do is attract them to you extra hard. And so I tend to preface any type of request like this with rules of my own. Speaking, if I mean, I haven't done this in a really long time, to be honest, but when I would do this, say, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was talking about this through God, to God, and saying, look, I'm looking for something that you approve of, not just something that exists. I'm not talking to free spirits running around out there. You have to be blessed by the true OG God in order to be participating in this little experiment with me. But no, my grandparents, they're all beautiful people. They're all past now. Okay, I could trust them 100%. But I ask that there's protection around these experiences before I go into them. So I thought I'd just pass that on to you, just in case, one, you have the concern of that, or you're avoiding any experimentation out of a fear that something bad could happen. You just get your Bible out, wherever you think your protection is, I think the very first step, let's just say someone came to a clinic, okay? They had a sign out front that says something like, the spiritual clinic. And they read the dope sheet on the front, and it says, we train you to be more enlightened so that you can find whether or not you have a connection to this realm, whether or not someone's actually waiting to talk to you in the end. And of course, there's palm readers and psychics that do kind of little tricks here and there, and they impersonate people, and they tell you very obvious sort of 17 statements that can be read years and years later. It seems like something's going to happen tomorrow, and it won't. So you have charlatans. But when you're isolated by yourself, well, then there's no charlatans. You are by yourself. But let's just take this as an experiment of how we could systematically open the mind of an individual. Now, I went through a transition personally, and I do not know the years on this, but when I was a kid, they told me I had a soul. And the way I perceived that was sort of like me being the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, and I envisioned myself to have a motor inside me, but it's just in there, and I don't have any say in what it does. It's just in there, and it's really not me, but it's this thing that kind of makes me possible, if you know what I mean. It's sort of the way I perceive my internal organs. I do not perceive my internal organs to have a consciousness by themselves. I perceive them to be part of the greater whole. But today, through all of this talking with you guys, listening to your comments and exchanging things plus personal experiences, I now truly feel like I am my soul. I'm not my body. That's how I identify inside myself. Oh my gosh, did I just make a gender? I have soul fluidity. How about that? But yeah, I think, actually, you know what? There was an experiment I did, and I've shared it on one of the shows, and it's not related to anything, ghostly or apparition or anything like that, but I was experimenting. I read a book, and the book was talking about scientists that figured out that at 36 hours of consciousness, the left brain, your logic side of your brain, will simply go to sleep. It's been up too long. It's trying to mitigate everything in your life, and it will go to reserve battery, if not completely die out, leaving your right brain to be your sort of mechanical consciousness on your body side. And that in this state, between, say, 36 hours and maybe 48 hours, if you can stay up another 12, sorry, no, I got that. Yeah, that's right. Sorry. I'm on my right brain right now. You get more creative. You can do more creative things, creative concepts and abstract concepts of things you might be trying to solve, like an infinity project, will come to you a little bit faster. So I was experimenting with this, which is very, very tough, because I don't know about you, I don't do cocaine. So when I hit 36 hours, man, there's a sandy nature to my existence. It's as if I am a GIF or a JPEG that's loading slowly, except it's going backwards the other way. It was in high def, and now it's going back to low def. I'm partial. And so, I don't know that I really got any creative bump. Got a lot more creative bump just taking LSD. But I remember going to bed finally, and I thought, okay, well, I haven't really been able to master this thing. It was only a couple attempts to pull this off. But when I laid down, I think I was planning on staying up the extra 12, and I think I made it like maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours. And I was like, man, I gotta go to bed. This is ridiculous. So I lay down in my bed. I remember it's about 11 o'clock in the morning. And so I said, what I'm going to do is try to study the transition between consciousness and sleep, because there's only been one moment in my entire lifetime. I was spooning my girlfriend one night, and I got up behind her, and she was an inch taller than me. So I was like the little guy on the backside. And I remember looking into her back, or sort of my face was in her mid-back, and I just saw the transition of Tron Legacy, of Sam's character going into the grid, where this really quick boom. It's almost like my consciousness borrowed that graphic, and that's exactly what I saw. I just went bam, and I was right inside the dream state, which has never happened before or since. So I'm back at this bed, 11 o'clock in the morning, and I'm really tired. And so I was studying, what do I feel like? I mean, really, what do I feel like? And it was the first moment where I felt like I might have been able to discern the physical placement of my soul relative to my body. And if I was to describe it to you, I would say it was as if there was a sort of a football-shaped, although not pointy on the end, but like a round rectangle kind of shape, that the front of it would have been sort of at my forehead, but 2/3 of it is out the back of my skull. I felt like my consciousness was back behind the physicality of my head. And what was interesting was I'm trying to not stay awake necessarily, but I'm trying to stay sentient, conscious. And I felt a couple drops where like my soul was just trying to back out of my body, and I had this like jolt, like I was falling. It happened at least twice in that session. So I held on. And then I was thinking about the whole theory of the biorhythm of sleep, that we're on these biorhythms. We teach our body the habit of where the sun is at a particular time of day is when you're tired, and that's why you got to reset your sleep, And the more you stay in a particular pocket, it's harder to move your bio sleep back. The theory of that, right? And my mind, I saw basically a big metaphor, which was it was, I can describe it as two different types of metaphors that I saw in this moment. One was a subway. And the subway car basically said, it's almost like the Matrix, right? That basement, darker, bleach bypass look. And here comes the subway. And it basically said, if you don't get on this car, you're going to have crappy sleep, because this is the car of sleep. And this is the cycle that you're on. You're on the 11 a.m., the green line or whatever it is, the orange line or whatever in New York, and you're going to go off to your dreamland. So it's important that when it shows up, you get on it, because you're going to be screwed up if you don't. So I'm thinking about that. And that was, I think, what I injected into it from my trying to make an analogy of what I was feeling and thinking, the abstractness that was coming into focus. But the second one that seemed to be more involuntary to me was that it was like an orbiting planet. That the planet orbits by, and I go in and out of regions of sleep, and it has to do with being on the planet or not being on the planet as it goes around a universe. And it wasn't relative to anything that's in what we're supposed to be inside of, right? Our solar system. It was almost a Doctor Who fantasy illustration of a solar system. But it was about instead of, I kept thinking about this, and the planet starts turning into like a bundle of souls, like a bigger soul that you join to go off to do this sleep pattern. It was a very interesting experience. So to the credit of the book, in this state of sleep deprivation, which is obviously used for breaking people of trying to hold up their barriers of telling lies, as well as to break a person from having decent thoughts, because your system starts to break down. Now, I said a long time ago, my Origin of Man episode, that loud cars are made from insecure men. But I said that perhaps this realm has a rule that we put in the system, and it goes like this. If we're spiritual beings, right, we're pure light, and we are Qs from Star Trek. We live forever, and we're just omnipotent. We just can do whatever we want. We can have any experience that we want. And this realm doesn't exist quite yet. But maybe a metaphor of this realm exists. Nothing like the one thing that we have, which is to drop out of this omnipotent spiritual light entity and go into a flesh entity, a mass energy entity, and lose our memories and reset, right? And then it came to me during an episode that everything that is alive sleeps. Fish sleep, cows sleep, horses sleep, insects will rest. And we do too. And why is that? The body of any sleeping being is at a giant upper 90% functionality while you're asleep. Now, obviously, if you've injured yourself or what have you, you need time to heal, and just not using the part of your body that is broken is probably the best way to let the cells reach each other and mend bone and mend flesh. That's a little bit different than what I'm talking about. If sleeping is something that has to do with resetting your energy source or what have you, then it should be plausible that if you and I stayed in bed for, say, 2 days, we simply were conscious when we're conscious and we sleep when we sleep, but we stay in bed. We make it a point not to move that much, to really be gentle when we do move. Put a catheter on or whatever so you don't have to get up. Whatever it is, then on that third day, you should be able to get up and stay up a lot longer because you just rested yourself tremendously. But that's not the way it works, does it? This sleep seems to be inserted into our genetic code. And imagine you are in this Q world and you're like, okay, we could do everything. What are we talking about here? I'm repeating myself from my old episode from season 1. But ain't no one watching that stuff anyway. The compromise is this. Some soul says, I don't want to lose access to our heavenly world. What are you, crazy? I mean, I'll go down there and I just, what if it goes bad down there and all this? So someone says, okay, I got you. What's going to happen is every single iteration, we'll just build it into the DNA. It just has to do what we call sleep. It's like a program in software, right? It sleeps, which means the body-soul connection disappears. Thus, the consciousness that you develop when you're awake, this apparition between the two things, disappears. And you fall back into the only thing that you really are, which is your soul. And if you want to dream, if you're one that wants to reach back into the soul realm, you can have what's called a dream. And it's going to have these experiences. Yes, it will bring part of the definition and part of your experiences and maybe even some of your thought algorithms back into the soul realm, which will be nice because you can solve some of your problems in this dream realm. But if nothing else, you get a reprieve. Maybe get a fantasy world. As you construct realities, as we do in this soul realm, one soul says to another, you can store up locations. And so, I don't know about you, but I definitely have dream locations that I revisit from time to time. They'll seem extremely familiar to you. And you can even, at least if you're like me, you'll be in your twilight zone, you're about to go to bed, and you'll start thinking about some of the beloved places that you've gone in your dreams where, oh man, it'd be so cool to go back there, wouldn't it? A dream where, back to my hometown, it was a little futuristic, still kind of rustic at the same time. That was cool. Or the Art Deco theater I go to, or that secret room, my uncle's attic. I got a possum walking over me at my head. Thought it was raining. My reason for mentioning this is I believe that there's an aspect of experiencing these other spiritual entities by first understanding what you are, and to understand it beyond just words, but to understand it at an experience level. To say, you know what? You're right, man. I'm not my body. I'm the soul. I can feel it. So feeling your soul, I think, is one of the first things that you can do to improve your entire perception of this matrix that we're in. It begs the question, if Neo and the Matrix story was a real story, it'd be a great question to ask him. Once you came out of the Matrix and you healed up, and then you did your training to go back in to do some more tests, when you were back in the old reality that you were in, the Matrix, did you feel different? Did you feel that you were actually a human being sitting in a chair with this thing jacked in the back of your spine? What was the difference in your perception of yourself? Well, if there weren't these Mr. Smiths everywhere, it would have been great. It would have been an utter dream simulation that he could have totally controlled at the end, right? What else can we do to wake up? Well, part of it is to, I think, envision the ecosystem of what we are probably in. You either have one of three, usually, opinions about the afterlife. There is none, there is one, and within the dimensionality of there is an afterlife, you might have your traditional Christian belief, which is it stays in heaven and you never come back. And then the more you think it through, you think, wait a minute. This place is amazing. A lot of work was put into this place. It seems to be a lot bigger than the amount of souls occupying it. And even though you might have had a very fruitful life, there's always more that you could have learned and could have accomplished. You could have improved yourself, the very matrix of your soul itself, the intelligent configuration of who you are. And even if we're a collective on the other side, like some big Borg God soul, you're still bringing something back for the collective. But isn't there individuality in this world? I mean, isn't that part of the gift of being this symbiotic being between body and soul? I don't think I hear anyone else's voices of friends of mine, as much as I might spend the entire day with them. I'm not hearing their thoughts. I might be able to guess what they would think in a particular situation very accurately, but I'm not hearing their thoughts. There's that magic trick that I have seen done here in Huntington Beach, not just David Blaine, where you get two people to stare at each other. And it usually works best when they have an emotional connection, boyfriend, girlfriend, father, mother. It was just done with Jamie Foxx and his daughter with David Blaine. But they stare at each other for a certain amount of time. And this is indicative of the experiment that colleges have done where you touch foreheads for approximately 30 minutes. And then they separate the two people, put them in radio frequency proof rooms, show one person something, ask the other what they're seeing. And they can read their mind for about 5 minutes or so, very, very accurately, way over random. Okay. Like 21% randomness of any event in the universe. But this trick is that they get two people to stare at each other and then makes one of them close their eyes. And then the magician, the person pulling this trick, and I've seen it done in the back of a restaurant, they'll touch the one that still has the eye open and they'll touch the body somewhere. Then they say, okay, open your eyes. What just happened? And the person with their eyes closed that was not touched goes, oh, well, you touched me right here. And it's the exact location on the other person's body. And the room blows up. It gets so specific that they did it to his daughter, and he touched the upper shoulder blade of Jamie Foxx, and the daughter was like, yeah, you touched me right here. And of course, the room blows up. So let's do it again. Let's do it again. And this time they made Jamie close his eyes, and he took a playing card and flicked the tip of the daughter's nose. And so then Jamie knows, look, I felt something and I'm not supposed to feel this because I think you did it to my daughter. He knows the game. And so they go, okay, what did you feel? And he's like, you flicked my nose, right? And the whole room goes nuts. And of course his family's there and they run up to him like, he did it to your daughter, man, not to you. It's a bit of a mind-opening experience. If you get the book called The Holographic Universe, I think in the first half of the book, there is a experiment that they talk about that's famous. And it has to do with a hypnotist. And the hypnotist, was one of these guys that would come to your house back in the 50s and they just do a little show for you, right? And apparently probably fairly wealthy pulling this thing, but a lot of people in this room, and they've done a lot of little tricks here and there, little parlor tricks, but the grand finale was that the guy said, okay, the owner of the house had a daughter who was young. He said, I'm going to hypnotize you. And so he was, we're going to do the trick. Everyone else is going to get the trick. You're going to be the trick. And so he hypnotizes this guy and he says, you no longer have a daughter. If she's in the room, you can't see her. She doesn't exist. You do not recognize that she exists. Now, I want to give you an explanation for this. Let me tell you what happened. He takes the watch off this guy. When he wakes up, he takes the watch off the guy. He then motions to the daughter, because they already prearranged this, that she's going to stand between, it was the guy's watch. It was the hypnotist's watch, sorry. You're going to stand between the dude who's been hypnotized and the guy who's hypnotizing him. And he says, this is my father's watch, and it has an insignia on the back, and I just want you to read what it says. And so he flips the band backwards, right? And he holds it up to where the daughter's stomach would be. But she's she's between them. So the man leans up to read the back of the watch. But his daughter is right there in front of his eyesight. The man was able to read the watch through his daughter because he was told his daughter doesn't exist. Now, how's that possible? Now, I'm going to give you what might be an inaccurate description of what's actually happening, but it just occurred to me recently this might be what's taking place, and wow, what a scary little prospect this might be. I'm always telling you, your body is the physical thing that you're borrowing to have this experience in this realm, and your soul was connected to it. In various episodes, I imply that it's connected to your pineal gland, which rests on the top of your brainstem. That's why it's the third eye. Your soul is connected to the universe, because everything's connected to the universe, meaning the tree of life. All souls are connected to the tree of life. Why do you always seem to find the same lover, the same family members, the same friends? Because you're all in the same branch together. That's why. Now, doesn't mean that branch can't physically live in India and you live in Kansas. It doesn't matter. Where we exist in this realm is completely irrelevant, in my opinion. But I want you to physically see these icons in your mind. The body, the soul. And as I always say, and as Hindus say, the consciousness is this cloud that's created between the two. In a computer, it would be the hard drive is long-term memory, and your computer is the body, and memory is your consciousness. Turn the computer off, memory disappears, right? Okay. So let's keep that little analogy to make it a little easier to explain this. Imagine all that a hypnotist does to you. And imagine a hypnotist is your television, your phone, everything that puts a thought that could be discerned into your mind. All they're doing is hacking the computer. Now, for those of you who aren't computer gurus or hackers, let me give you another analogy, and we'll bring it right back to this previous analogy. One of the biggest scams that happens in online games, either by way of it's an older game, and this experience happened a decade ago, or it's a poorly coded game today. And there's plenty of poorly coded games today. You're playing a video game and you finish it, and you did really, really well. And they have what's called a leaderboard. They show you how you rank in the world of all the other players who played that game. And you did really well. You played for 4 hours straight and you got 25 million points. And then you look at the leaderboard and some person's got 220 million points. And you're thinking, how the hell is that even possible? I played for 4 hours. If 4 hours gets you 25 million, is that person staying up a week? The way that they used to do this, and it still happens to this day, is a poor coder will allow the client handheld device or the computer to hold in its memory your high score. And then that number is sent through the wire to the back-end computer in the cloud and gets stored on the hard drive as your high score. Well, people who don't even know how to play the game know how to hack this. They find the location in memory that is constantly being updated on behalf of this application. And they look at it, and they look at the screen, and they look at it, and they're like, oh, there's the score right there in memory, right at this point in memory. And they run a hacking tool off to the side to hack a new number in that position, putting a really high score in that position. And then when the game is over, you just have to end the game immediately, and boom, that score goes to the back-end server as an illegitimate, impossible score. And it kills a bunch of customers, because customers go, man, I'm not playing this game anymore. It's either they think the score is real and you're never going to reach it, or they know it's a poorly coded game and they're being cheated out of being at the top 10 if they're really competitive. All right. So why couldn't this guy see his daughter? It's possible that the hypnotist, through serendipity, through years and years of experience of other people for perhaps hundreds, if not thousands of years, have figured out words and phrases to get into that little cloud, that little temporary consciousness that you have since you woke up. And they insert a change in the logic. You're a person from Mars and you speak Martian talk. You don't see your daughter anymore. So he is interacting with the matrix, and instead of the polygons of his daughter being in front of him, blocking the ray casting that would go to the watch and bounce off and hit him in the face, right? He doesn't have any polygons of his daughter anymore, and the light goes right through her from his mind, hits the watch, it goes back in his eye, and he's able to read a watch on the other side of his kid. But the second that the words are undone, the trigger phrase that deprograms this hack, the code is restored, and he sees his daughter again. If you ever wondered how the world got so crazy in such a short period of time, imagine that all of the videos that we had seen derived from the 90s where these intelligence agents said, oh, we got mind control down pat. There's a video about 1996, It's just an audio recording, but this guy is very convincing, and what he says vets out with what we see as observable reality. He's on some radio interview, it wasn't really a podcast because that didn't exist back in those days, but the dude said, I believe I'm correct in saying it was a mid-90s recording. I could be wrong, but he said, well, what do we do to avoid sort of inadvertently being programmed? He says very clearly, don't ever watch the television. Don't ever listen to the radio. Don't watch any movies. And don't listen to any music that's been sold to you by a big record company. Essentially, all media generated by them. Avoid it. Otherwise, you will be programmed and you won't even know it. Isn't it weird how people think they see things that aren't there? It's being injected into us, potentially. I mean, we're pretty certain, subliminal advertising from back in the day, all kinds of lewd stuff they stuck in. Disney with all of their lewd stuff stuck in there. The castle with all the phallic symbols. Was it Mufasa? The stars spelled sex. The cloud in the stars, like the apparition in the stars spelled sex. I mean, it's just all over the place. We know that exists. We know that the recordings in department stores will tell us to buy and not to steal, just like They Live with John Carpenter. So that's using the system to manipulate us, which is why it's nice when we get a chance to quarantine ourselves and have a spiritual experience through meditation and thought. We're in control, for the most part, right? We come in with our bag of history. I will tell you that the day I stopped watching television, my life changed. Now, I watch my television, but I'm watching Star Trek. I'm watching specific YouTube videos that I vet. But I'm also paying attention to the state of my mind before the experience and my state of mind after the experience. And I will tell you, once you re-ingest the material that you've seen your entire life with a new mind, you start seeing things you never saw before. And it's not really, any type of crazy thing. It's not like numerology where you're seeing the number, 27 everywhere. No, it's way more intense than that. You'll see the algorithms of breaking apart the family, making promiscuous sex just the biggest thing in the world. Divorcing is just the thing to do. You'll see that in the 1970s was all about the occult climbing into films and making it really fun. Tongue-in-cheek, right? The act of, I think, getting enlightened in a spiritual way obviously is extremely powerful to the human condition, but it comes with responsibilities. You wonder why there might be a lot of rules of why Tesla can't show up in your bedroom? Because it's sort of like the Star Trek Prime Directive. Before I finished Voyager this year, there was an episode I completely forgot that existed, but it was about a probe that Earth had sent out 300 years before the timeline of Voyager. And they're within communication range of Earth on a daily basis now because of some inventions and because they're just 30,000 light years away. And so they were able to exchange information. And so the Starfleet Academy said, hey, you're about to fly by this location where this probe, that famous probe, doesn't exist in our timeline. It was shipped out after Zephyr Cochrane did his first contact with the Vulcans. They said this thing was right in the vicinity where you are. If you don't mind delaying for maybe a week or so, see if you can scan all the planets in the area where it might have landed, see if you can find it. It'd be cool to bring it home. So after some searching, and Ensign Kim figures it out, they find the damn thing. But when they go down to the planet, it's this post-apocalyptic planet that was inhabited by some intelligent life like man. There's all these missile silos everywhere. Place is just bombed out, man, like Fallout 4. And they get down there and start running around, and they finally find the thing, and then all of a sudden they're apprehended by some locals who are so polluted with antimatter in their bodies that they don't even show up as life signs. But what happened was that the probe had an antimatter engine in it. And so when the people on the surface found it, they worshipped the thing. They thought it was amazing. This is before the Prime Directive was in place. This probe would have never been allowed to be on a planet had the Prime Directive been in place. But they opened this thing up and they found the antimatter reactor and they duplicated it. And they found out that antimatter in the faux theory of its existence, generates a lot of power. And so they built a network of power plants all around their planet. And eventually they didn't completely understand it. There was a containment issue. It all went critical and killed everyone on top of the planet except for about 5,000 people that hid underneath. Now, incredibly irradiated. And so they were angry at Voyager, and they said, "You're the humans that sent this thing here, and you're here to conquer our planet, aren't you? And it's all been a plan. You sent this probe. It's promising all this wonderful interaction between us and the humans, and you put that antimatter engine there. You knew we were going to reverse engineer that thing, and you knew we wouldn't understand it completely, and you knew this critical thing was going to happen." They were delusional. Mind you, their brains would have been completely irradiated into insanity, but we'll skip over that fact. I mentioned pulling the thread out of the sweater at the beginning of the episode. I would say, without deep consideration as to what you might be toying with, forget the possibility of demonic forces that you might bump into. Prior to that being a consideration, even if the only thing that you could interact with would be very positive souls that care about you, want the best for you. Perhaps one of the biggest restrictions in unraveling this part of our consciousness is that perhaps for some insanity would ensue instantaneously because of what they experienced, be way beyond anything that they could have conceived of, and thus be terrifying, embedding in them a PTSD that could not be removed no matter what happens. They have to die and reset to have that terror pulled out of their system. Perhaps you're far more intelligent than that. You don't have a negative reaction, but you start toying with the very fabric of your existence to the point you undo it. You may not undo it completely, but imagine being half in your body and half out of your body and trying to exist. And all of a sudden, the people that rely on you and love you, the very future that you wanted to have, and your interaction with all things valuable in this world becomes an impossibility because you've sort of rewritten your own code, and you're not a coder. You just hacked yourself out of existence, and at least as a nice balanced being. So it could be that some of this has to be 100% us receiving exactly what we are capable of experiencing without repercussions, without undoing any of our own code. So someone walking up to you and saying, "Hey, I'm on the other side and I'm okay." You can hear that one. It's in and out of your brain very quickly. Both experiences that I had were extremely quick. There's the third one. It's a hybrid, weird one where I felt like I had a consciousness that was borrowing my body. And that was a very, very weird one. Very positive, extremely positive. It seemed like a male. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it seemed like a man. And there was no age to it, but it was definitely a super smart being. And I was in a state of complete painlessness. It was really strange. Broad daylight, like noon, 12:30 in the afternoon on a summer day in this house where this being was probably inside of my body, coexisting, not really controlling me in any way, shape, or form, but experiencing things, and it must have been 5 minutes total. That was a very, very weird experience. And when I asked this being where we were, because he was talking about how silly we were for living in houses, I thought that was funny. I'm fully awake, man. He showed me this sphere, and he said, "This is the universe, and we're in it, and it's beautiful." And he said, when you find out where we are, you're going to love it. It's going to be great. And so, everyone that's ever talked about passing to the other side typically brings back a story of just elation and serenity and painlessness. And obviously, a secular person can say, well, that's just your desires for what you want the other side to be. First, you want the other side to exist such that mortality isn't something you fear. And there's a lot of us that can reach an intellectual capacity where you're like, I don't fear not existing as much as I don't fear existing on the other side. It's who cares? If you're not here, it doesn't matter. But if you are here, well, cool. Hope it's not a bad place, right? Now, someone asked me recently in the comments as to whether or not that the human soul could be trapped by an entity other than God. Be it man, be it an alien race, you pass away and your soul can be trapped by some physical device, or perhaps a physical device that can manipulate that spiritual energy on the other side. I would say that because of the categorical freedom that has always been described by those who've had near-death experiences, I would say no. If it is being trapped, because there is a gentleman out there that I saw a video, looks like it's from the 90s, but he talked about this sort of array of energy around Earth that had been built by our ancestors of evil, and when you die, you simply bounce off this bear and you come back to Earth. Okay, but he never accounts for all of the people that have been on the other side of all different ages, creeds, origins in the world that all have very wonderful experiences and actually fairly unique. But the common thread of all the stories I've heard about going to the other side is, one, there's definitely a traveling period, albeit quick, to get to the other side. There's no Jesus Christ on the other side. There's definitely godlike being. But no organized religion that I've ever heard on the other side. There's one Satanist who was a strange character from New York, but he didn't really have a near-death experience. He had a very coked-out drug experience where he felt like he had taken so much drugs he was hallucinating about going to hell, and Jesus was down there, and he said, that's what turned me around from being a Satanist to being a Christian. And I say, hey, man, whatever works for you. You just won the game. A lot better than you were playing it before. But that's sort of, an a la carte thing that doesn't match the more, you've been in a car wreck, you've gotten really sick, that kind of thing. This person was self-abusing with drugs that could produce hallucinations. So in terms of us being here, the only thing I could think of would be for those people that came back and had wonderful experiences, but they were all told it wasn't your time, you have to go back. And I think that's a very interesting commonality that has been documented for over a century of people saying they went back and were told by someone, sometimes relatives, but a lot of the time just a being on the other side. One, again, there's the 8-year-old girl that died in a car accident in 1954, I believe, and she said that an older man, escorted her from where she arrived to another doorway and said, okay, you got to go back down. So I tend to believe that there is no mechanism for any being, whether it be human or alien, to tamper with that force. And I know there's lots of gray alien stories that are told by people that can't complete any other detail about their story, where they're on a mothership and they're being impregnated on the ship, and that they actually get to meet the soul of their child before they give birth. Okay. All right. Amen. Maybe. Doesn't seem to make any sense to me. There's all kinds of, basically whatever fiction sells is what they talk about. There's people out there professionally make this stuff up. And I mean professionally, and they're famous. And if I said their names, you go, oh my God, that guy really? It's like, yeah, they literally go, they're very creative. I think they're tied to very deep agendas to get us prepared for other things that they're going to probably fraudulently put on man. So, alien talk is where you have to keep yourself in a very secular, matter-based world. I don't mean that in an anti-religious realm, but just it's a very scientific objective for most of those folks. Doesn't mean those beings do not exist by any means. It's just, I would encourage you to keep those two separate for now. And I know it's romantic. Some people say, oh, gray aliens are just demons. Gray aliens are robots. It's just pop culture making up stuff. It just is. So of the most credible people that have ever discussed these beings that I have seen, that I believe seem to be telling the truth, they're very living beings that can speak and they communicate, and some of them telepathically. But like one gentleman said, he goes, look, I hate it when they say these people are only telepathic. He goes, maybe they are with each other, but they talk. And they even have a problem speaking our language, and they parrot what we say and that kind of thing. So that's a whole different realm. I don't think you need to worry about that. in terms of enlightening yourself. But you might try the sleep one if you're just really, really tired. Doesn't matter if you've been up 36 hours. Doesn't matter. If you're absolutely exhausted and you feel like that you just can't even stay awake, study it. Study it as you lay in your bed. See where you feel like you really exist. You feel like you're your fingertips, or do you feel like you're this other command center that's simply floating inside the skull cavity? Some people might explain it because our brain is in our skull. There's nothing about the brain that explains the brain. Okay, there isn't. It's a tube. It is a tube that is very Fibonacci, and it looks like it is just simply the emitting harmonic device that channels that which is your soul. Talk about frequency of thought. Well, it's just two halves of a cavity. And when you have these individuals that undergo surgery where they deliberately remove half of their brain, which is supposed to deaden the other half of the body, well, give them some time and they end up repurposing the remaining half for both sides of the body. It's phenomenal. Some people have brains that are the size of lemons, and they're fine. They're geniuses. But they have mostly water inside their brain. It's strange. They're not hydrocephalic or anything. My grandmother is this famous story. This Top Gun pilot who was a student of my grandmother when she was teaching 5th grade. He came back and he said, look, I'm having headaches and I'm being pulled out of duty. And they just scanned my head. And he goes, I have a really super tiny brain. And I don't know if I'm going to die soon, but I wanted to revisit all the people that were very impactful in my life. And my grandmother constantly had a stream of kids. You teach for 36 years, it happens, right? And she told me that story, went in one ear out the other, and just probably in the last 2 months, I saw a scan of her brain that was exactly like that. And why is that? How is that person able to function at an absolute peak level of human efficiency? Well, you could explain it by having recessed pygmy genes, and little tiny pygmies had little tiny brains, but they were, as history has recorded them, so formidable they were able to destroy giants, so I don't think that really matters. It's because you are your soul, man. A squid has a soul and a tiny, tiny, tiny brain. Gigantic squids have teeny, tiny tubular brains the size of your pinky. Just one valve, just one artery of calamari is their perceivable brain as we understand their physiology. It's because they have a soul, man. So give it some thought. Let me know your experiences with this. And if you have any pivotal moment in your life where you gain sentient sort of spiritual thought, do share it in the comments because you could help a bunch of us. I mean, again, these are university discussions that we can use to harvest ideas into a bigger picture, a bigger state of consciousness. As we are facing a potential extinction of man by these absolute psychos, it's probably a good idea to get in touch with your spiritual self to find out what you really think that you are and where you think you really are in the universe. Well, are we in a matrix? Is this real? What is real, man? These are questions to ask at this monumental time in man's history. We've never all been closer to meeting our God than right now. So let's talk about it. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. We have a whole bunch of stuff up there. Audio, video, all of our social media. Lots of independent, freedom-loving choices out there. We have an All Renew Mastered Season 1. We have a store with a bunch of funny shirts and fun shirts out there. Thank you for all of you who've been recently purchasing quite a few of those. I really appreciate that. And of course, always our PayPal and Patreon folks. You guys make the show happen. Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.